The year Yunsha was brought back to the residence, I was squeezed into the crowd and caught a glimpse of her. The red mole at the center of her brow was as vivid as a spot of blood. Clinging to Mother's arm, she called, "Mother," her voice sweet and soft. Mother answered with a smile. I lowered my head and looked at my ankle. The crescent-shaped scar was still there, the one Nanny Wang had inflicted by pinching me. 14 years had passed. What was owed had to be repaid by someone. Main text. When the midwife's hand reached inside, I recognized that half-broken fingernail. In my previous life, this fingernail had dug into my ankle so deeply that it left a crescent-shaped scar. Granny Wang lifted the swaddling clothes, then reached to her waist with her other hand and pulled out a damp cloth bundle. She untied it, revealing an infant who was crying. My crying stopped first. Madame Meng lay on the bed, blood soaking through 3 or 4 layers of bedding, her eyelids closed to narrow slits. She was counting, asking, "Is it out yet?" After every bout of excruciating pain, her voice as light as paper. Ouyang Feng knelt outside the screen, his fingertips gripping his robe so tightly that they wrinkled. All he could hear was Granny Wang saying, "Push harder, madam." Granny Wang placed the infant from the cloth bundle beside me and hurriedly wiped away the blood. The child had a red birthmark on his forehead, upturned outer corners to his eyes, and a loud, lusty cry. I shifted slightly onto my side. It wasn't deliberate. My whole body was simply too slippery, and the amniotic fluid dragged me downward. Granny Wang took advantage of it, pushing my swaddling clothes half an inch toward the foot of the bed and moving the red mole baby into the place of honor, then wrapping her in the brocade quilt embroidered with blessings for longevity that Madame Meng had sewn by hand. I recognized that quilt cover. I had embroidered it for 3 months, with stitches so tight that not even water could seep through. "Congratulations, my lord. It's a daughter." Granny Wang raised her voice and hurried outside the screen. Ouyang Feng stood up, his knee knocking against the footstool with a muffled thud. His hands trembled as he accepted the swaddled baby. He lowered his head and gazed at the red mole baby's face, a half sentence, "She looks like her mother," rolling up his throat before he swallowed it back. I was placed at the foot of the bed, swaddled in coarse cotton cloth. Just as she was leaving, Granny Wang seemed to remember something and turned back, stuffing me into an empty wooden box at Madame Meng's feet. The box was engraved with the 4 characters made in the year of Guimao, and the smell of lacquer stung my nose. Madame Meng opened her eyes halfway. "Bring it here and let me have a look." Granny Wang hurriedly handed over the red mole-marked infant. Madame Meng's finger brushed across the baby's little face, stopping when it touched the red mole between the brows. "This mole. Born with it, she has an air of nobility." Granny Wang picked up the thread. "I've delivered babies for 30 years, and every baby girl with a mole between her eyebrows has gone on to bring prosperity to both her father and mother." Madame Meng murmured an and did not look again. She was utterly exhausted, her head tilted to one side, one palm still resting on the baby's back. Ouyang Feng entered the delivery room and stood 3 paces away, afraid to approach too closely. He merely craned his neck to look at the face nestled in the brocade swaddling cloth. "She looks like you," he said. "All daughters look like their fathers." Madame Meng tugged at the corners of her mouth. Someone called from outside the door that the hot water was ready. Old Madame Wang answered and went out, kicking the wooden box at the foot of the bed as she passed. Its lid closed most of the way. In the darkness, I heard her speak in a hushed voice with a woman outside the door. "Have you changed it?" I threw hers beside the pigsty south of the city. "Someone will definitely find it within 3 days." "And the silver?" "Lady Sue's deposit. The other half will be delivered to your residence tomorrow." The footsteps receded. I lay inside the wooden box, my head resting on coarse cotton cloth, the tip of my nose brushing the indentations of the inscription carved into the bottom of the box. The year of Guimao, the year of the locust plague. Rice prices tripled, and more than a dozen abandoned infants froze to death south of the city. I survived. In my previous life, I was abandoned beside a pigsty. On the third day, a lame old woman picked me up and raised me until I was 7, then sold me to a cloth shop as a scullery maid. When I was 14, the Ouyang household began searching for their daughter. Madame Meng plastered the city with portraits bearing the words "a mole" in the center of her brow, and the cloth shop owner pushed me forward, claiming that the girl had a scar on her ankle. I entered the estate. Yunsha glanced at me from behind the screen in the main hall, and that very evening had someone move my bedding to the room next to the woodshed. I've dotted the mole between my brows with cinnabar for 3 years, and even Mother didn't recognize me. Sitting on an embroidery stool, she peeled a tangerine and tossed the peel into the brazier. It sizzled. The moment you arrived, she suddenly remembered she had a real daughter. Later, when Madame Meng fell gravely ill, old woman Wang let the truth slip while kneeling before the morning hall. Yunsha smashed a teacup on the spot, saying the old woman was spouting nonsense. But Ouyang Feng investigated and traced it to the butcher under the name of Fourth Lady Su of the Drunken Spring House in the southern part of the city. 13 years earlier, the butcher, surnamed Zhao, had sold an infant girl to a midwife. Smack! A slap landed across my face. You took Yunsha's place for 14 years. Ouyang Feng's hand was still trembling. She should have been the legitimate eldest daughter. I stood ramrod straight then, without covering my face. The scar on my ankle showed above my shoe, crescent-shaped, the mark Granny Wang had left by pinching me. I pointed to it and said, "Father, look carefully." Ouyang Feng turned his face away. Yunsha sobbed and cried, "Sister, don't blame father," twisting her handkerchief until her knuckles turned white. Half a month later, she married into the Marquis of Pingyuan's household. The day before her wedding, she came to the woodshed to see me, carrying a bowl of lotus seed soup. "Sister, have some." She smiled and stirred it twice with a spoon. The Marquis said that after I enter the household, there can be no idlers left in the residence. I could taste what was in that bowl of lotus seed soup. It was bitter. She stood in the doorway watching me clutch my stomach and crouch down, then unhurriedly pulled the door shut and bolted it. Now I am in a wooden box. The lid of the box wasn't fully closed, allowing in a sliver of candle light. Outside, old Madame Wang was giving instructions to Nanny Qin, who served Madame Meng. Nanny Qin asked, "Where is the eldest young lady?" Old Madame Wang replied, "She's here with me." The footsteps turned back. She lifted the lid and poked the red mole-marked baby's cheek with her finger. "This is your eldest young lady." Nanny Qin exclaimed, "Oh my, what an auspicious mole." Indeed. Granny Wang picked up the infant and thrust him into Nanny Qin's arms. "Hurry and carry him to the warm chamber. Madam is going to rest." Nanny Qin left carrying the baby with the red mole. Granny Wang lowered her head to look at the wooden box and met my eyes. She froze for a moment, then reached in and scooped me out. The coarse cotton cloth fell away, and I lay naked against her arm. "Not a crier, at least," she muttered, tucking me under her arm as she pushed open the back door. Rain pelted the bluestone paving. She jogged through the 2 courtyards, slipped out through the side gate, and turned into a narrow alley. At the end of the alley lay a heap of rotting vegetable leaves and broken earthenware jars. The pig pen was on the left, where 2 sows huddled beneath the shed, grunting and snuffling. Granny Wang squatted down and set me on the pile of dry hay beside the pig pen. Wrapped in a layer of coarse cotton cloth, I had a lump of damp sugar stuffed into my mouth. "Don't blame me," she said. "If you must blame someone, blame your father for being so useless he couldn't even scrape together the midwife's fee." She stood up, pig manure staining the hem of her skirt. After taking 2 steps, she turned back and gave my ankle a vicious pinch. "Leave a mark, so it'll be easier to recognize you when I come looking for you later." That scar turned purple on the spot. She twisted away and plunged into the rain. The side gate creaked shut. I lay on the haystack, the damp piece of candy in my mouth so sweet it tasted bitter. The pig rooted through the hay, while rainwater dripping through the leaky roof struck my face and ran down from the corners of my eyes, mingling with the little bit that hadn't spilled just now. I could no longer tell them apart. When old Madame Wang's footsteps disappeared at the mouth of the alley, footsteps sounded from the other side of the haystack. Someone's coming. They crushed a rotting cabbage leaf underfoot. The footsteps were light. Each step landed first on the toes, then the heel, a person accustomed to walking at night. When the dry grass atop the pile was pushed aside, the first thing I saw was a hand, knuckles thick, calluses in the web between thumb and forefinger, half a dry biscuit resting in its palm. It was an old woman. Her hair was wrapped in a blue headscarf, half her face hidden in shadow. She walked dragging her left leg, the sole of her shoe worn down to almost nothing. She squatted down and touched the biscuit to my lips. Still alive. Her voice was hoarse. She scooped me up from the pile of straw. Most of the coarse cotton cloth had come undone, so she tucked it back into place. When her fingers touched my ankle, she stopped. "Who did this?" she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't cry. She looked down at me for a while, tucked the dry biscuit into her bosom, then freed both hands and wrapped me beneath her outer garment. The garment smelled of old mugwort, mixed with stove ash and pig feed, but it was warm. When she stood up, her left leg couldn't bear her weight. Her whole body tipped to the right, and she had to brace herself against the wall before she could steady herself. A baby who doesn't cry can be raised. She muttered as if to herself, dragging her leg toward the other end of the alley. The sow in the pigsty grunted twice. Rainwater dripped through the gaps between the roof tiles, landing on her shoulder. She didn't look back. As she left the alley, she turned sideways into an even narrower passageway. The walls on either side rose so high she couldn't see the sky, and rainwater gathered into a thin stream that trickled past her feet. She took me into a room. It was very small, with a plank bed against the wall, a stove by the door, and half a bowl of leftover porridge sitting on the chopping board. She took down the bowl, cleared the board, spread a layer of dry cloth over it, and placed me on top. Then she turned and rummaged through the cupboard, pulling out an old jacket and tearing it into strips. She changed my swaddling cloth. The coarse cotton was smeared with pig manure and mud, so she threw it into the stove and burned it. As the flames leapt up, they illuminated half her face, high cheekbones, a scar across her left eyebrow, and eyes that were cloudy but bright. "Girl," she said. "My surname is Chin. I sell tofu at the entrance to the alley." She fed me hot porridge. It had been watered down, thin as rice broth, but she blew on each spoonful to cool it before bringing it to my mouth. When I swallowed, the corner of her mouth twitched. "Once you've eaten, you belong to this old woman." The next day, she bathed me. The wooden basin was set beside the stove, and the water had been heated but wasn't hot. When she put me in, she glanced at my ankle again. The purple mark had swollen, like a curled-up worm. "Was it the midwife who pinched you?" She gently touched it with the pad of her finger. "What a cruel thing to do." She said no more. After bathing me, she wrapped me in an old jacket altered to fit and carried me to the bed. Sitting on the edge, she sewed another garment. Her needle moved slowly. After each stitch, she brought the fabric close to her eyes and squinted at it. "We need to give you a name," she said suddenly. Granny Wang at the entrance to the alley came hurriedly out through the side gate last night, with nothing in her arms. I heard someone from Madame Susie's household meet her in the back street and say they'd exchanged for a baby girl. She turned to look at me. "You're the one who was exchanged." I bit down on her finger. My teeth had only just come through, so it didn't hurt. She didn't pull her hand away, letting me bite as she set down the needle with her other hand. "Let's call you He," she said. "Being abandoned doesn't matter. If this old woman picked you up, then you belong to this old woman." He. That was what Granny Chin had called me in my previous life. She raised me until I was 7. When the cloth shop came to buy a servant girl, she clutched my hand and wouldn't let go. The shopkeeper gave her 2 taels of silver, which she counted 3 times before stuffing them into the sole of my shoe. "Take it," she said. "Don't come back." I never saw her again. The year the Ouyang household searched for their missing daughter, I returned to the alley. The room was empty, dust had settled on the stove, and one leg of the chopping board was missing. The neighbors said old Madam Chen had passed away the previous winter. 3 days before she died, she had still been selling tofu. She had soaked a bucketful of beans but never finished grinding them. Now I was lying on the same bedboard again. Old Madam Chen shook out the mended clothes and held them up against me. "A little big. You'll still be able to wear them next year." She folded them and tucked them beneath the pillow, then blew out the lamp. In the darkness, she lay down, reached out, and pulled me into her arms, resting her chin on the top of my head. Her breathing was slow and deep. "I'll go buy a chicken tomorrow," she said. "I'll stew it into soup for you to drink. It'll help bringing your milk." How could an old tofu seller have any milk? I didn't move, pressing my ear against her chest and listening to her heart still beating, one beat after another. Just a little faster than last night. On the 3rd day, she really did buy a chicken. It was scrawny, with yellowing feathers. She killed it, plucked it, and stewed half a pot of soup, filtering it through gauze 3 times before feeding it to me. While I drank the soup, she sat by the stove gnawing the chicken bones, cleaning them completely and lining them up in a row in the bowl. "The Ouyang family's daughter has gone missing," she said suddenly. "The whole city is covered in notices. She has a red mole between her eyebrows." I didn't respond. She tapped my forehead with the tip of her chopsticks. "You don't have a mole here," she said. "But that mark on your ankle, don't let anyone see it from now on." I swallowed the soup. She reached over and wiped the soup from the corner of my mouth, then got up to wash the dishes. Her back was hunched, and she dragged her left leg as she walked. The wooden basin struck the stove with a loud thud. "Ah, chi." With her back to me, she said, "This old woman won't live much longer." I stared at her spine, the bone that propped up her old jacket, with a curve in the middle. "Once you can walk and talk, that should be about enough." After washing the dishes, she turned around and wiped her hands on her apron. "By then, remember to find your own food." By the 2nd month, I could roll over. In the 4th month, Granny Chin put me in a bamboo basket beside her tofu stall. When someone came to buy tofu, they would lean over to take a look at me and say, "This little girl doesn't cry?" Granny Chin would just smile and say, "Born easy to care for." In the 6th month, I pulled myself up by the rim of the basket and stood. Granny Chin was cutting tofu at the time. The knife veered and nearly sliced her hand. She stared at my straightened legs for quite a while. "The scar on your ankle," she said, "has healed over. It's not as noticeable now." I lowered my head. The crescent-shaped purple mark had faded to a light brown, hidden on the inside of my ankle and invisible unless you looked closely. Granny Chin set down the knife, crouched, and pulled my trouser leg down to cover it. "Remember what this old woman told you." She stared into my eyes. "Don't let anyone see it." In my 7th month, I spoke my first word. Not Ma, not Granny, but Do. She was pouring soy milk into the pot when the spoon clanged into it. She lifted me out of the basket and held me on her lap for half the day. She didn't say anything, just held me, with her chin resting on top of my head. That pot of soy milk got scorched. It was autumn when Granny Chin passed away. That morning, as usual, she got up to grind the beans. The millstone suddenly stopped after 2 turns. I was sitting by the stove adding firewood when I heard her let out an "ah." I turned around and saw her slowly sliding down while clutching the millstone. I ran over and supported her back. She was lighter than I'd expected. Her bones pressed into my palm like a bundle of firewood that hadn't been tied tightly enough. "The beans haven't been fully ground yet," she said. I helped her onto the bed. She lay flat, her eyes fixed on the roof beam from which last year's cured pork hung, dried hard by the wind. She stared at it for quite a while, then suddenly raised her hand and pointed at the cabinet. "Second shelf. Blue cloth bundle." I opened the cabinet. The blue cloth bundle was tucked at the very back. Inside was a string of copper coins. I counted them, 47 cash. There was also a piece of paper with a circle drawn on it and 3 characters written inside, Ouyang Feng. "The notice posted at the alley entrance," she said. "Your father's name. If you ever want to find him, take this to the Ministry of Revenue." I retied the cloth bundle and put it back where it had been. She did not look at me again, her eyes still fixed on the roof beam. The corners of her mouth moved, as if she wanted to say something but swallowed it back. She left that evening. I kept watch until dawn, then reached out to feel for her breath. She was cold. The pot of beans soaking on the stove had not yet been ground, and a layer of foam floated on the surface. I went to find the village headman at the alley entrance myself. He glanced at me, then at the person on the bed, and waved his hand. "Carry her out." I used the 47 coins Chinpa had saved to buy a thin coffin. The woman who sold flatbreads next door lent a hand, helping carry her onto a handcart and haul her to the charity burial grounds outside the city. It was dark when I came back. There was one fewer person in the house, and the beans on the stove were still soaking in the basin, the water already murky. I scooped out the beans and threw them away, scrubbed the basin clean, and turned it upside down on the chopping board. The next day, I locked the door and tucked the key into a crack in the wall. I hoisted my bundle onto my back, an old jacket altered to fit me by Granny Chin, the cloth shoes she had made, and the blue cloth bag. Of the 47 coins in the bag, I spent 45 on a coffin and slipped the remaining 2 into my breast. At the entrance to the alley was a notice from the Ouyang residence. Its edges had curled, and the ink had run a little. "A red mole between the brows, born on the 17th day of the 8th month in the Gingzi year." I glanced at it and walked on. I was 7 that year. For the next 7 years, I rented half a room in the southern part of the city and did washing and starching at a cloth shop. I never let anyone see the scar on my ankle. I wore long trousers in summer and padded trousers in winter, and whenever anyone asked, I said it was a burn. The cloth shopkeeper's wife was named Madame Chien. She was talkative but generous, paying me 120 a month and providing 1 meal at noon. Madame Chien would occasionally chat with me, telling me this and that about the eldest daughter of the Ouyang family. "She's the real deal, a true heiress." She shelled peanuts, tossing the shells into the charcoal brazier. "She has a red mole between her brows." At her full-month celebration, they set out 80 tables. Physician Ouyang carried her out to show everyone, and the whole hall burst into applause. I said nothing, pulled my hands from the cold water, and rubbed them together. "It's a shame the second young miss had such a hard life," Madame Chien continued. "She came down with smallpox when she was 3 and didn't survive." Madame Meng grieved for a long time. The second young miss. My hands paused as I washed the cloth. Yunsha had had smallpox at the age of 3? That hadn't happened in my previous life. In the spring of my 14th year, Madame Chien suddenly summoned me to the front hall. A woman in her 40s, wearing an indigo waistcoat, was seated there. She had a mole at the corner of her mouth, and when her eyes swept over me, they stopped on my face twice. "It's her." Madame Chien gave me a push. "She has a crescent-shaped scar on her ankle." The woman squatted down and reached out to pull up my trouser leg. The crescent-shaped scar was revealed, light brown and curled along the inside of my ankle. "How old were you when you got it?" the woman asked. As a baby, I said. How did you get it? I don't know. I just started keeping notes. The woman stood up and pulled a piece of paper from her sleeve. Drawn on it was an ankle with the scar in exactly the same place as mine. Nanny Qin. Madame Qian rubbed her hands beside her. Is this girl really? We'll discuss it after we return to the residence. The woman, the one called Nanny Qin, turned to look at me. Girl, what's your name? Ah Qi. What is your real name? No one ever gave me one. Nanny Qin did not ask again. She paid Madame Qian 2 taels of silver and took me out of the cloth shop. The carriage was waiting at the mouth of the alley with blue cloth curtains and narrow wheels that made for a smooth ride. I sat in the corner with my bundle on my lap. The blue cloth wrapping was still inside, and the paper bearing the name Ouyang Feng was folded into quarters and tucked beneath everything else. When the carriage stopped, I heard the main gate being opened. It had 2 vermilion-painted doors with bronze door knockers and a threshold beneath them that rose above my knees. Nanny Qin helped me down from the carriage with one hand and lifted the curtain with the other. 3 people stood in the main hall. Ouyang Feng sat in the seat of honor, his hand resting on the armrest, his knuckles faintly white. Madame Meng leaned against a cushioned couch, some color in her face, though not much. Beside her stood a girl dressed in a lotus-colored jacket and skirt, a red beauty mark dotting the center of her brow like a drop of rouge that had not yet dried. Mother, the girl said, her voice soft in precisely the right way, is this elder sister? Madame Meng did not respond. She stared at me for a long time, her gaze falling on the scar on my ankle before shifting back to my face. What's your name? Ouyang Feng finally spoke. Qi, I said. Your real name. No one has ever done so. Ouyang Feng's brow twitched. The young woman beside him clutched her handkerchief, stepped forward, smiled at me, and reached out to take my hand. Sister, you've suffered. Once we return home, I'll take good care of you. Yunsha. Madame Meng finally spoke. Let her rest for now. Yunsha withdrew her hand and obediently stepped back to Madame Meng's couch. As Nanny Qin led me out of the main hall, I glanced back. Yunsha was bending over to hand Madame Meng a teacup. The curve of her profile, the red mole at the center of her forehead, and the faint smile at the corners of her cheeks. I was led into a side courtyard. It was not large, with 3 rooms and a jujube tree in one corner, its branches just beginning to sprout new leaves. The eldest young lady will stay here for now. Nanny Qin pushed open the door to the main room. If you need anything, tell this old servant. I walked in. The furnishings were simple, a bed, a cabinet, a desk, and a chair. A bronze mirror sat on the desk, its surface blurred. I reached out and turned the mirror face down. As I turned, the courtyard gate was pushed open. Yunsha stood in the doorway, holding a plate of pastries, lotus seed paste pastries, arranged in neat rows. Sister, she said as she stepped over the threshold, Mother was here just now, so there were some things I couldn't say. I've come to apologize to you. She placed the plate on the table, took a step back, and tilted her head at me. Sister, you must have suffered a great deal during all those years away. From now on, while you're in the residence, I ask only one thing of you. She paused. Please don't mention the mole in the middle of my forehead, sister. All right? Yunsha stood by the table and waited. The plate of lotus seed paste pastries rested on the table, with a flower-etched note beneath it. A branch of flowering crabapple was painted on the note, and the ink had not yet fully dried. She had finished painting it while waiting outside the courtyard just now. Elder sister, we mustn't bring it up. Seeing that I did not respond, she repeated herself, lowering her voice as though afraid the walls might have ears. Mother's health won't withstand it. She's believed that mole was natural for 14 years. If she found out it was fake, she left the sentence unfinished. Her eyes lowered, her lashes casting a shadow beneath them. She truly looked worried on Mangsher's behalf. "What about father?" I asked. Yunsha raised her eyes. "You saw father's temper today, elder sister." If he learned that the midwife had tampered with things back then, Granny Wang would be the first person he wouldn't forgive. "But what about mother?" "She regards that red mole as her very lifeblood. If, the moment elder sister returned, you told her it was fake, mother might not even be able to catch her breath." She bit her lip, clutching her handkerchief as she edged half a step closer and reached out to touch my sleeve. "Younger sister is begging elder sister. In any case, now that you're back, nothing that should be in the household is missing. Mother's health will recover with proper care, and father will be pleased too. Just take it as helping your younger sister this once." Her fingertips rested on my sleeve, pinching it lightly. The pressure wasn't strong, just enough to make it impossible to pull away. "Then don't mention it," I said. She let out a sigh of relief, released my hand, and stepped back. The smile at the corners of her lips rose slowly, as though a thin sheet of paper had been lifted. "I knew you were kind-hearted, sister." She turned to leave, but when she reached the doorway, she looked back. "Oh, that's right. I'll come and have breakfast with you tomorrow. Since you've only just returned to the residence, you may not be used to things here." The courtyard gate closed, and the sound of footsteps faded along the corridor. I lowered my head and looked at the plate of lotus seed paste pastries. Each one was stamped with a begonia design, and the handwriting on the note was unmistakably by the same hand. I picked up the plate and set it on the windowsill without touching a thing. That night, the wind blew in through the cracks in the window. After sitting there overnight, the pastries had hardened by morning, their shells split with fissures. As expected, Yunsha came. Qingxing followed behind her carrying a food box. Her hands were steady and her eyes lowered as she arranged the dishes. Once she had finished, she retreated to stand by the wall. Yunsha sat opposite me, scooped up a spoonful of porridge, and raised it to her lips. She spoke before taking a sip. "Did you sleep well last night, sister?" "Well enough." "Was the bedding warm enough?" That jujube tree in the courtyard is quite old, and when the wind blows at night, its branches knock against the window. If it troubles you, sister, I'll have someone come and cut it down." "No need." Yunsha set down her spoon and dabbed the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief. "Elder sister doesn't say much. Is it because you've been away too long and aren't used to talking to people, or have you grown distant from your younger sister?" Qingxing shifted in the corner by the wall and lowered her head a little further. "Doesn't say much," I said. Yunsha gave a little laugh, like a pebble skimming across the surface of water, brief and light. "Then from now on, younger sister can do the talking. Elder sister need only listen. You needn't hurry to pay your respects to mother. Mother has to take her medicine in the morning, and after taking it, she needs to rest for an hour. I'll go at the hour of the snake." Yunsha's spoon paused against the rim of the bowl, producing a crisp clink. She looked up, the smile still on her face, though the corners of her eyes tightened slightly. "The hour of the snake?" She set down the bowl of porridge. "Then I'll accompany you, sister." When I arrived at the main courtyard during the sea hour, Madame Meng had already finished her medicine. She was reclining on a soft couch, rolling a string of Buddhist prayer beads between her fingers. The beads were made of rosewood, polished to a glossy sheen. Nanny Qin was tending the incense burner beside her, lifting and replacing the lid. The medicinal smell in the room was half suppressed by the sandalwood incense. I curtsied. Madame Meng did not tell me to rise. Her gaze shifted from the prayer beads to my face and lingered there for a moment before dropping to my ankle. "Does that scar hurt?" "It stopped hurting long ago," How did you get it? It was already there when I came to my senses. Madame Meng rolled a bead between her fingers and asked no more. Yunsha came around from behind me, sat down beside the edge of the couch, and reached out to straighten the thin blanket over Madame Meng's knees. Daughter, your elder sister has only just come back. Don't start by asking her these things. She's suffered enough out there. Now that she's home, she should be properly looked after. Looked after. Madame Meng repeated the two words without a change in tone, then glanced at me again. Who made the clothes? Nanny Chin had the needlework room in the residence make them, Yunsha answered hastily. Madame Meng lowered her head and fingered her prayer beads, no longer looking at me. Go pick out 2 bolts of fabric for your sister. Take that moon-white cloud brocade from the storeroom and have a new outfit made for her. Yunsha's hand paused, but she answered quickly, Yes, mother. I'll have someone open the storeroom right away. After leaving the main courtyard, Yunsha walked ahead, her steps somewhat quicker than when she had arrived. As we passed through the covered corridor, she suddenly stopped. Without turning around, she called back. That bolt of cloud brocade was originally meant for a new dress for my birthday next month. I did not respond. She turned around, a smile once again plastered across her face, and covered her mouth with her handkerchief as she gave 2 small laughs. Listen to me, what am I saying? Now that elder sister has returned, naturally she should come first. It's only cloud brocade. I can wear something plainer and it will be just as fine. She walked toward her courtyard, then after 2 steps, tilted her head and glanced back at me. Elder sister, the Marquis of Pingyuan's residence is hosting a banquet on the 8th of next month. The invitation was delivered to father. The Marquis lost his wife in middle age and wishes to remarry. Father said I should go. She paused. Elder sister, come along that day too. I don't feel confident going alone. Good, I said. Yunsha's eyes brightened, and her smile deepened. Then I'll have someone prepare a set of clothes for elder sister as well. It's your first time going out to a banquet, so you can't dress too plainly. She turned and walked away. I stood in the covered corridor, while Qingxing followed behind carrying the food box. She had kept pace with us the whole way without saying a word. Nanny Chin came out from the main courtyard and, seeing me still beneath the corridor, walked over and gave me a half bow. First miss, she said in a lowered voice, Madam asked this old servant to ask you something. She moved half a step closer, her gaze level with the ground just below my knees. That scar on your ankle was already there before you could remember. But what about after you could remember? I looked at her. Nanny Chin did not raise her head and continued, Madam says there is no need to rush to hear the answer to some things. But if eldest miss has made up her mind, she may come speak with Madam at any time. She stepped back, performed a formal bow, and turned to return to the main courtyard. When the courtyard gate swung shut, it did not close completely, leaving a crack of fingers width wide. I heard Madame Meng's Buddhist prayer beads lightly striking the edge of the couch inside, once, then again. I walked back. As I passed through the second moon gate, I heard the crash of porcelain shattering on the ground from Yunsha courtyard, followed closely by a low reprimand. It was aimed at a maid, but the voice wasn't lowered enough. Are you blind? You measured the dimensions of the cloud-patterned brocade incorrectly. Weigh it again. The maid came hurrying out, clutching a measuring tape, and ran toward the storeroom. I turned into my own courtyard. The jujube tree in the corner had grown a little denser, its new shoots fading into tender green. Qingxing placed the food box on the table, then hesitated for a moment as she left. Miss. Second miss, she. Qingxing glanced up at me, then lowered her eyes again. Never mind. This maid spoke out of turn. She withdrew and closed the door behind her. I sat at the desk. The lotus seed pastry on the windowsill had already dried out, its petal pattern split with fine cracks. I reached into the bundle and felt the blue cloth parcel. The paper was still there, folded into 4, with 3 characters on it. I pressed it back beneath the bundle. Someone knocked at the courtyard gate. Twice, lightly. Nanny Ching's voice came through the door, low and hurried. "First miss, Madam has asked this old servant to deliver something." I rose to open the door. Nanny Ching stood outside, holding a small wooden box in her hands. It was made of camphor wood, its lacquer worn with age, and the edges where the lid met the box had been rubbed white. The madam said that once the young lady saw it, she would understand. She handed over the box and turned to leave. I closed the door and placed the box on the table. It wasn't locked. It opened with the slightest lift of the lid. Inside was a layer of red silk, with a folded sheet of paper resting on it. When I unfolded it, I found a portrait. It depicted an infant, with no red mole on its forehead, and the crescent-shaped scar on its ankle rendered in perfect detail. Written in small characters along the bottom, the 17th day of the 8th month in the Gingzi year, beside the pigsty south of the city. There were tear stains along the edge of the paper. They had dried, leaving a ring of wrinkles. Madame Meng had known for a long time. When Yunsha came to my courtyard on the 8th day, she was wearing a lotus fruit-colored baize with a subtle pattern and a kingfisher-inlaid butterfly hairpin in her hair. She pushed open the door and first glanced at the camphor wood box on the table. The lid was closed. Her gaze lingered on it for a breath before shifting to me. "Are you ready, sister?" I stood up. The moon-white cloud brocade Madame Ching had sent was made into a cross-collared long robe, with several sprigs of plain-colored honeysuckle embroidered along the hem. Yunsha looked me up and down, the curve at the corner of her mouth unchanged. Her gaze slid downward for a moment before returning. "The fabric really does look elegant on you." She came over and took my arm. "The carriage is waiting at the back gate. Father took leave today and is accompanying Mother. The Marquis personally sent Mother an invitation." Ouyang Feng's carriage was waiting outside the inner gate. With Madame Ching's help, Madame Meng climbed into the first carriage. Ouyang Feng followed behind. As he passed me, his footsteps paused for half a beat, and he glanced at me. "Your clothes look nice," he said, then got into the carriage. Yunsha took my arm and followed behind. When she entered the carriage, she lifted a corner of the curtain to peek outside. A few people stood along both sides of the street, craning their necks to look. She let the curtain fall and covered her mouth with a handkerchief as she giggled. The banquet at the Marquis of Pingyuan's residence has the whole capital watching. I said nothing. The carriage traveled for nearly half an hour before stopping. When we got out, the main gate stood wide open, and Zongyan himself was waiting at the steps to welcome the guests. He wore a dark-colored informal robe, a jade belt around his waist. His temples were slightly graying, but his back was straight. When his gaze swept over, it lingered on Yunsha's face for a moment before shifting to Ouyang Feng, to whom he clasped his hands in greeting. "Master Ouyang, thank you for honoring us with your presence." Ouyang Feng returned the courtesy and stepped aside to reveal Madame Meng. Zongyan came forward 2 steps, personally supporting Madame Meng by the left arm, his voice warm and gentle. "Has Madame fully recovered?" "An old ailment." Madame Meng's voice was flat, almost devoid of inflection. Zongyan led them into the garden. His gaze swept over me a second time, lingering a little longer this time, with a hint of speculation in his eyes. Yunsha happened to step forward half a pace at that moment, turning sideways to block his view and looking up at him with a smile. "Marquis." She gave him a bow. "Miss Yunsha." Zongyan nodded, withdrew his gaze, and led the way forward. The banquet was set up in the waterside pavilion in the garden, open on all 4 sides. The withered lotus leaves had not yet been cleared from the pond, and several wild ducks huddled at the water's edge. There were not many guests, 7 or 8 tables, all occupied by Hezonyan's old acquaintances. Ouyang Feng's table was beside the seat of honor, with Madame Meng seated to his left. Yunsha and I sat down beside Madame Meng. As soon as we took our seats, a man in a slate-blue robe stood up from the neighboring table and approached with a wine cup in hand. He was in his 40s, with a long, thin face and 2 flushed patches over his cheekbones. He swayed slightly as he walked, as though he had already gone through several rounds of drinking. "Master Ouyang," he raised his cup, "I have an unreasonable request to make." Ouyang Feng rose. "Master Qian, please go on." The man glanced at Yunsha, then at me. His gaze lingered on my face for a moment before returning to its previous position. "I am searching for an old acquaintance at the Zuichuan Pavilion south of the city and happened to hear that the red mole between 2nd Miss Ouyang's brows is exactly like that of 4th Madame Su of the Zuichuan Pavilion in years past. I apologize for my bluntness. I only wish to ask." He paused and set his wine cup on the table. "That mole on 2nd Miss's forehead, is it something she was born with, or was it added later?" The entire room fell silent for a moment. Hezonyan held his teacup suspended in midair. Yunsha's face went pale. Her lips moved, and she forced a smile. "I'm afraid you've had too much to drink, my lord." "I'm not drunk." Lord Qian walked around the table, pulled a painting from inside his robe, and unfolded it. It depicted a woman smiling with her eyes, a red mole at the center of her forehead, identical in position to the one on Yunsha's forehead. Back then, Su Xinyang sang at the Zuichuan Tower, with a red beauty mark tattooed in the center of her brows. She gave birth to a baby girl and, in the 8th month of the Gingzi year, sold her to the midwife. Lord Qian turned the painting over. Written on the back were the girl's 8 characters of birth, exactly matching those on the notice posted by the Ouyang household seeking their daughter. Yunsha rose to her feet, the chair legs scraping sharply against the floor. "You're talking nonsense." She turned to look at Madame Meng. Madame Meng sat there, rolling the Buddhist prayer beads between her fingers. She neither looked up nor spoke, and the beads continued to turn at an unhurried pace. Yunsha looked toward Ouyang Feng again. Ouyang Feng's face was livid, his knuckles clenched around the wine cup, the wine splashing out and soaking his hand. "Father," Yunsha's voice changed pitch. "Mother, he's lying. I've had this mole since I was little. Father and Mother saw it with your own eyes. You've had it since you were little." Madame Meng finally spoke. Her voice was very soft, as light as a thread swaying in the wind. "On the 3rd day after you came to the residence, I had someone make you take a dose of medicine. After you finished it, that mole faded for half a month. You then redrew it with rouge." Someone in the waterside pavilion drew in a sharp breath. Yunsha took a step back and hit the corner of the table, making the cups and bowls clatter. She turned to look at me, her pupils contracting before suddenly widening, as if she had just realized something. "It was you." She rushed up to me, her finger nearly poking the tip of my nose. "You came back to do this? You knew all along." "What did I know?" I looked at her. The red mole between her brows glistened with a rouge-like sheen in the sunlight. A small patch near her temple had been rubbed away, revealing the pale skin beneath. "You know I'm not," the words caught in her throat. She swallowed, her throat bobbing, and when she spoke again, her voice was already choked with tears. Sister, say something. Tell them I really..." "You bit me," I said. Everyone in the room turned their eyes toward us. Yunsha froze for a moment, then lowered her gaze to my hand. I pushed my left sleeve up an inch, revealing a faint, curved bite mark on the inside of my wrist. "When we were 8, over a pearl hairpin," I said. "You bit me. You said you were only playing around with me." Yunsha's lips trembled twice before she suddenly seized my wrist and raised it toward everyone. "Why is she bringing this up? She's my sister. What's wrong with a younger sister playfully biting her once? But she knew about my true identity and didn't tell me. She watched me live in the household for 14 years, treating me like her own younger sister. She stopped halfway through. The hand gripping my wrist was shaking, distinctly so. "When did you find out?" she asked in a low voice. I looked at her. Nurse Chin stood behind the crowd, holding the camphorwood box in her hands. Madame Meng pushed herself upright on the couch, setting her prayer beads on the table with a soft clack. "It wasn't her who investigated you," Madame Meng said. "It was me. I started the day after your smallpox subsided when you were 3, when I sent someone to the south of the city to inquire about the midwife." Yunsha let go of my hand. She took 2 steps back and knocked over a dish of fruit behind her. Almonds rolled all over the floor. She stepped on the broken porcelain and retreated until she reached the railing. The water in the pond reflected her face, and the red mole at the center of her forehead shattered into several pieces on its surface. Zhongyan stood up, straightened his robe, and clasped his hands toward Ouyang Feng. "Lord Ouyang, please return home to deal with your family affairs. Today's banquet ends here." Ouyang Feng did not move. He stood there, the wine cup beside him askew on the table, wine soaking across the entire tablecloth. He turned his head, his gaze passing over my face, then over the scar on my wrist, before finally settling on Yunsha. "Who is your mother?" Yunsha leaned against the railing, the breeze over the pond lifting her skirt, the lotus-colored fabric clinging to her calves. Her lips opened and closed twice before the third word finally emerged. "Fourth Madame Su." The waterside pavilion fell completely silent. In the distance, a wild duck flapped its wings twice, splashing water onto the bank. Madame Meng slowly rose to her feet. As she passed me, she paused, then reached out and pulled down the sleeve over my left wrist, covering the scar. "Go home," she said. The carriage wheels rolled over the bluestone pavement, their sound heavier than on the way there. Madame Meng leaned against my shoulder. The Buddhist prayer beads were no longer in her hand. She had left them on the table in the waterside pavilion before getting into the carriage. Her hand rested on her knee, her fingers curling and relaxing by turns. She had not spoken a word. Ouyang Feng sat opposite, facing the carriage curtain. A sliver of sunlight slipped through a gap in the curtain, falling just on the section of robe over his knees. It was wet, and the wine stains had not yet dried. He got out first when the carriage stopped. Nanny Chin helped Madame Meng in through the back door. He did not head toward the main hall, but stood inside the second gate, brushed the back of his hand against the corner of his mouth, then turned and said to a servant, "Have her come to the main hall." The main hall door stood open. Ouyang Feng sat in the seat of honor, with a fresh cup of hot tea beside him, though he had not touched it. I stood at the entrance to the hall. When Yunsha was led in from behind, half her hair had come loose, and the kingfisher feather butterfly hairpin was askew against her bun, but it had not fallen out. She entered the hall and stopped, glancing at Ouyang Feng, then at me standing in the corner. Nanny Chin came out from the inner room, placed the camphorwood box she was carrying on the table, and stepped back behind Madame Meng. Madame Meng sat on the cushioned couch, not fingering her prayer beads. In her arms she held an old bundle wrapped in red silk, its edges worn and frayed. When Ouyang Feng spoke, his voice sounded as though it were full of grit. "Who is Su Xingyang to you?" Yunsha's lips were dry. She licked them before speaking, "My birth mother." "When did you find out?" Yunsha didn't answer. She turned and glanced at me. That look held every emotion imaginable, with hatred on the surface. What lay buried beneath was too tangled to make out. It was her. She pointed at me. I guessed it the night she returned to the manor. That day, Mother asked about the scar. I heard it from outside the door. "What I'm asking about is you." Ouyang Feng's voice rose slightly. Yunsha withdrew her fingertips and clutched her cuff. "When I was 6, Granny Wang came to the residence to deliver mugwort, and I ran into her by the back gate. She stared at the center of my forehead for a long while and said, that beauty mark was placed perfectly, just like Su Xinyan's back then. I looked into it. Madame Meng's fingers traced across the bundle in her arms. You found something, she said. I found out. Yunsha let out a laugh, the sound seeming to be cut short halfway. I know I'm a fake, but you let me live as the eldest young lady for 14 years. Mother loved me, and father held me up at my full-month celebration to show me off to everyone. If I had said it, what would you have done? She took half a step forward, facing Madame Meng. Could mother's health have endured it? What about father's official reputation? I bore the burden of being a fake for you for 14 years, and in the end it's all my fault. Madame Meng did not move. She lowered her head and began untying the red silk bundle in her arms. The knot was tied too tightly, and she failed to undo it after 2 attempts. Nanny Wang crouched down to help. When the two of them opened the bundle, there was a pair of old embroidered shoes inside. Entwined lotus branches were embroidered across the uppers, and half of the soles had been worn through. Yours. Mrs. Meng placed the shoes on the floor. Yunsha stared at the pair of shoes without moving forward. Her face grew paler layer by layer, from her cheekbones to her jaw, until even her lips lost their color, like paper soaked through with water. These were sent to the manor by Madame Su, Mrs. Meng said. On the day you turned 1 month old, she had Granny Wang bring them. Beneath them was a letter saying that if her daughter was doing well, she would never darken our door in this lifetime. She never came, Yunsha said. She did. Madame Meng raised her eyes. She came the day you contracted smallpox at 3 years old. She stood outside the back door all night and didn't leave until dawn the next day. I had someone give her 2 taels of silver. She accepted it and never came again. Yunsha's back leaned against the doorframe, her spine slowly sliding down against the door. She didn't cry when she crouched down, merely clutching her skirt so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Ouyang Feng stood up. He walked over and stood in front of Yunsha for a moment, looking down at the crooked Yunsha hairpin atop her head. He reached out, pulled out the hairpin, and set it on the table, then took a sheet of paper from his sleeve. A divorce decree. He unfolded the paper and smoothed it flat. Words were written on it in freshly ground ink that still glistened with moisture. You were never surnamed Ouyang, so there's no divorce to speak of. But from this day forward, the Ouyang household will have no second daughter. Yunsha tilted her head up to look at him. He did not look down. His gaze rested on the corridor pillar outside the hall, and his throat bobbed once. Let's go. Yunsha stood up. Her legs were a little unsteady as she rose, and she braced herself against the doorframe for support. Her gaze shifted from Ouyang Feng to Madame Meng, who had already retied the red silk bundle. She glanced at me. I stood in the corner, my sleeve lowered, completely concealing the scar on my wrist. You knew all along. She walked up to me and stopped. You knew from the night you returned to the manor. I said I wouldn't bring it up. Then why didn't you say anything? It's not time to talk about that yet. She stared at me. I raised my left hand and pushed up my sleeve, revealing the crescent-shaped scar. She glanced at it, then took 1 step back and another. Her heel struck the threshold, and she left the main hall. The sun outside had already begun to slant, and her shadow stretched long across the bluestone path. No one saw her off. No one went after her. When Nanny Wang opened the rear door, I was standing in the covered walkway. She didn't slow her steps, continuing straight toward the rear door. As she passed through the 3rd moon gate, her shadow bent once on the ground, split in 2 by the threshold. The back door stood open, its bolt lying on the ground. She stepped out, planting 1 foot in the muddy ground outside. Her footsteps paused for a moment, then headed toward the mouth of the alley, her skirt dragging through the muck. I heard her footsteps going south across the city, past the pigsty and the narrow lane. The lanterns of Zuachuan House glowed at the end of the alley. I walked to the back door and stood there. After a little less than half an hour, a commotion arose at the mouth of the alley, followed by the sound of things being thrown downstairs. A lotus-colored jacket and skirt came tumbling down, folded together, landing on the ground and splattering mud. Right behind them came a pair of embroidered shoes, their soles still new. The upstairs window slammed shut. The figure at the mouth of the alley crouched down and remained there for a long time in front of the pile of clothes. Through the crack in the door, I saw her reach out and touch the padded jacket and skirt. She quickly withdrew her hand, as if she had been burned. She stood up and turned to leave, walking farther and farther away with her back to the rear gate of the Ouyang residence. I reached out for the door. Nanny Chin stood behind me without saying a word. My hand reached the left door panel and pulled it toward me. The door hinge made a full turn with a creak. The right door panel followed, closing alongside it. I gave the door a push, and the bolt lifted and dropped into its slot. Click. Ching Xing handed me the bundle from behind. Inside was a blue cloth bag, with the sheet of paper folded into 4 still pressed at the very bottom. Chin Po's 47 coins had long since been spent, but I had kept that piece of paper all along. I took it without opening it and tucked it back into my sleeve. From the direction of the main hall came Ouyang Feng's coughs, one after another, as if he were trying to cough something up from his lungs. Madame Meng slowly approached from beneath the corridor, holding a red silk bundle. When she reached the back door, she saw that the bolt was in place, but said nothing. She reached out, took my hand from the bolt, and clasped it. From now on, this door stays closed. Her grip was tight, and her palm was warm. The story has come to an end. Thank you all for your support. See you in the next one.